Okay, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where in the world you might be today. And welcome to the first um, meeting, the first Tao study meeting of the new year, 2019. It's wonderful to be able to connect with all of you again. And today, my presentation, of course, is from day 37 of the Tao of Joy Every Day, The Ultimate Warrior. And the subtitle I've chosen here is Prepare for War, but Live in Peace. And so before I actually get into the next slide, I just want to briefly say, it's interesting, just from the title of this, you might think, boy, that's an odd title for the Tao topic, right? Because you say the ultimate warrior. I don't think you can think of the word warrior without thinking of the word war, which is actually within the word. And you might say, well, isn't war the antithesis of peace? Isn't the Tao all about peace? And in some sense, I could say, well, yes, the Tao is about peace and unity and balance. That really is what the Tao is about. So why the ultimate warrior, and why the preface, the first part of the subtitle, prepare for war? Why are those in there? Are those at odds with the whole idea of spiritual Taoism, even if you practice it in a secular way, the way I do, and I think it's fair to say the way Derek does, even though it's a spiritual topic? That may seem at odds. And of course, it's impossible to have a discussion about something with the word warrior in the title without discussing peace. And similarly, if you were going to give a presentation on peace, I think it would almost be, you wouldn't do it justice if you didn't bring up the opposite side of the coin, which is war. So hopefully in this presentation, I'll try to explain the way Derek did so skillfully in this chapter about why being the ultimate warrior is actually a good thing, or actually is something that actually can actually promote peace. So I hope to be able to do that as well as Derek did. But as always, I want to invite you, those of you who have the book, or if you haven't gotten the book yet, but you're considering it, I encourage you to acquire it if you can, and to actually read Derek's words in the chapter. I think there's only been one time where I've actually read the words, but Derek is a fantastic writer, and in review, every week or not every week, but on the weeks where I have a presentation and I prepare and I read what he has there, in some sense it's very easy for me because Derek's sort of done all the work. He's expressed the sentiment very skillfully. And so, yeah, I'll sometimes tweak it a little in my own words, or I might bring up my own ideas that come to me as I read it. But ultimately, Derek's words are there, and they're very well expressed. So I encourage you to read them if you're in a position where you can. And if you're not right now, that's fine too. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. So I'm going to start with a review of day 36, knowledge. And in a way, this topic that we did last time well, not the last time we met, but the last time that I gave a presentation, flows actually very nicely because it talks about knowledge and power. And in a sense, it would be hard to have a discussion of war and peace, or the ultimate warrior, without talking about power. I mean, in a way, that sort of cuts into it. But again, it sort of comes into power over your own self. So just move that. Okay. So to review, we said, knowledge is power. We've all heard that. But we pointed out, we talked about how there's a difference between living and dead knowledge in terms of power. And just as there's a difference between the authentic power of the Tao and the temporal power of the world, so to speak. And that really, in a spiritual context, temporal power is kind of an unauthentic illusion of power, really. If for no other reason than it's fleeting, no matter how much power, if you're at the top of the food chain here on Earth in a temporal sense, time is destined to get to you. We'll all die, or whatever temporal power we have will fade away. But whatever is the essence of us that remains after that event happening, there's an inner sacred power within each of us, and that part is permanent. It doesn't go away. This is, of course, a matter of faith, but it goes on beyond beyond death, beyond the cycles rather of birth and death. It's permanent power in a sense, and just as when we talked last week, living power, when you put it into action, has a permanence to it, because when you take what you know temporally and put it into action towards the good, that's using knowledge as power to make permanent change. So pursuing dead knowledge leads to complexity and confusion. We talked about that, and sharing dead knowledge is a sign that we're kind of ego-driven. A lot of times, people display knowledge so that they can say, "Hey, look at me! Look how much I know." But people who actually do know quite a bit know that the more you know, the more you realize how little you know, and that's very true. So true growth happens from the wisdom that comes from putting the actual knowledge that you've learned into useful, unattached action. That's the goal, or what we should strive for. How to actually take the knowledge we have, because we all have knowledge. Some of us are better at specific kinds of knowledge than others, but whatever your talents are that you have to work with, but it'll still be dead knowledge if you didn't put it into action to do something in the world. So living knowledge offers clarity and true understanding, the understanding that comes from taking our knowledge and putting it into action. And this is a practical, useful knowledge that can be used to create effortless joy and happiness. And in a sense, when you're using living knowledge, ideally, I think you're just doing, so you don't even think about it as knowledge. It's just what you do, and I think, and it just sort of comes up naturally, and that's sort of where the joy of life is, when you take the talents or the knowledge or the experience that you've had and you actually put it to use in the moment. That's really where the joy and happiness of life, and you can do that whether you're taking your knowledge and doing something that's sort of very centered towards yourself, like maybe doing an activity where it's just you and that activity. I gave the example of me puzzling, how I like to put jigsaw puzzles together. That would be an example. It's just me and the puzzle, so to speak. Unless I'm doing it with my daughter, then it has a connecting moment with it as well. Or if it's something you do as a group, people who have maybe different kinds of knowledge, and they all bring it together for a group activity, and then you have this connection that can happen. So there's the review of day 36, knowledge. And so now we move on to day 37, and the ultimate warrior. And the theme that I really loved in this chapter that Derek made so well was the difference between being a person who promotes peace versus one who provokes peace. And on the surface, as if you listen to that sentence, there's a certain, you might hear that and go, what does that mean exactly? So I hope that I can unpack the idea a little bit. So here I have a picture of a warrior on top of a horse. And just in looking at that, you sort of see the power. He's holding the spear. He's adorned with the armor. Just looking at that, you can tell that in a certain sense there's power in being a warrior, so to speak. But what Derek pointed out was that the noble warriors of China, the ultimate warriors of China in the ancient times, they aggressively trained to make themselves ready for war. They were trained in the skill of battle, or of having to use violence to control and take over a physical situation immediately, or effectively, or quickly. And yet, those warriors, they weren't spoiling for a fight. They weren't, having been people who actually undoubtedly experienced war, because we know that there was a lot of sort of warring that went on in ancient China. You could just know that soldiers who actually experience war ultimately end up being the ones who hate the practice of it. Because to actually do it, I don't have to convince anyone here how awful war is. Anyone who's studied any of the wars, past or present, on this planet, how awful they can be. The innocents that suffer, the bloodshed, human suffering, both physical and emotional. Those are all byproducts of war. And the ancient noble warriors, they didn't seek out war. They were itching for a fight. But at the same time, as it was their duty to be in one, they wanted to end it swiftly. But, really what they want to do is their goals were to work on themselves so that they were prepared if they had to engage in war. But the idea that they'd be engaging because they're promoting the welfare of the greater good for those who are unable to fight. In any society, there's young people that are too young to fight. There's old people that are too old to fight, and there are people at the age where they can. And so, in a way, they took on the responsibility. When you talk about promoting the welfare of the greater good, it might be defending the innocents, the aged, the elderly, the very young, or maybe even people who are just physically unable to protect themselves in a warlike situation. So they strove, to avoid fighting, but at the same time, let's face it, we live in the world. You have to sort of be prepared for what do you do if it happens. You may want to be a person who lives in absolute peace where you never have to even swat a fly, but if someone comes to your door and breaks in, and tries to kill you, well, you're not, just because you're a Tao cultivator doesn't mean that you're supposed to peacefully sit there and let them slaughter you. That's not what the Tao is about. And I think that we're sort of getting to the point that Derek made. It's like there's a difference between the promotion of peace and the provoking of peace. And hopefully I can explain this a little better as this goes on. So here's my next slide. So we just came off the Christmas holiday, which of course is a season of peace on earth and goodwill towards men. And that Christmas in a way for a Tao cultivator should be like every day, just as Christians say that it's important to keep the Christmas spirit in your heart, not only on December 25th, on Christmas Day, but every day of the year, all 365 days of the year. And, in that sense, there's a similarity there. In Tao cultivation, you want to cultivate the seeds of peace all year round. But in doing so, as I said, one of the first points Derek makes in this chapter, in fact, I think it's the first sentence, is that peace is not the same thing as pacifism. And so I want to bring up a couple of themes here. So the first theme is that I want to bring up is a well-known paradox that you may have heard, maybe not exactly as I've written here, but some version akin to this. If you want peace, you must prepare for war. So that seems very paradoxical, and it is in a way, but it really sort of speaks to the theme that Derek brought up in this wonderful chapter, and that's that the warriors, they focused on being ready. They focused on themselves, on improving themselves, on practicing the things that a warrior needs to know. They practiced those things so that they were ready for the eventualities that they could possibly encounter. Okay, so it was very much being a warrior, in a sense, our preparing for war is very much about the focusing on self to be ready for battle. And of course, as Derek points out, life, in a sense, can be a battle, can be thought of as a battle. We all have challenges to face in life. They may not be as ugly as the confrontation of war, where you're forced with the choice of being slaughtered or slaughtering. But in a sense, we all do battle. Sometimes we do battle with each other. Sometimes we do battle with ourselves. To conquer yourself, this might be akin to the Christian sentiment of killing the flesh, right? A lot of this battle is between our own demons, so to speak. So the next thing I want to bring up is a favorite Star Trek episode of mine from the original series, because I'm sort of a purist. I haven't paid much attention to the newer stuff, a little bit of it. But an episode from the original series called "The City on the Edge of Forever." And I know not everyone is a science fiction nerd, as I am, but bear with me if you're not, because I'll try to make a point the best I can. And I'll just briefly sort of explain this episode and what happened. And I'm doing this for a reason. So the Star Trek episode is called "The City on the Edge of Forever," and the Enterprise crew, they find themselves on this new planet, and they beam down to it, and there's this time portal on the planet, and it's controlled by some kind of intelligence that speaks to them. And they find it, and they're looking, and they go, "What is this thing?" And the voice comes along and says, "Well, this is a time portal. I can show you your entire human history, from beginning to where you are now, and you're welcome to look at it if you want." And so they agree, and so the time portal starts playing human history from the beginning to where they are now. And what happens is there's some accident occurs. I forget the exact details, but Dr. McCoy ends up beaming down to the planet after being accidentally injected with some serum that makes him temporarily insane, and he jumps through the portal, disappears. And all of a sudden, Kirk and Spock are like, "Well, where is he? We got to get him back." And the intelligent portal says to them, all of human history is gone. All that you knew, everything that ever was, is gone. And so now they're stuck on this planet, and all of human history behind them is wiped away. And so, they figure out that McCoy must have done something back in time that altered the future so that their existence ended. And so they have to go back and figure out what it was. And so, they jump back a little bit before he actually gets there so that they have time to figure out what happened. And in doing that, what they figure out is that that they encounter this woman, this rather remarkable woman. And of course, this is a popular series that's bent toward the audience. So as we often see in Star Trek episodes, Captain Kirk, falls in love with the beautiful female guest star. And it turns out that McCoy is also drawn to this person in the past. And what they find out that happens is the reason why all of human history ends is because McCoy somehow saved this woman from being hit, I think, by a car, and prevents her from dying. And because this wonderful woman lives, she ends up, she's a pacifist, as it was. And it turns out that she gets to meet with FDR, and she convinces him that engaging in warfare would be a bad thing. And so her ideas are accepted, and so pacifism is accepted. And so World War II is never fought. The United States never enters into World War II, and as a result, Germany develops the bomb and conquers the world with it. And that fact, and I don't think they give much detail in the episode, but ultimately leads to the end of humanity, instead of how it is in Star Trek, where the Earth somehow unites in peace, and then moves on sort of to continue the struggle of war and peace. Actually, it's just with other planets or other systems or galaxies, or aliens from other galaxies and so forth. But so there's this point where, ultimately in the end, Kirk basically stops McCoy from saving the woman, and she dies, and then everything is back to normal, and they go back to the planet and they go. But the point that Spock says, as Spock always says, many of the great lines in Star Trek, Kirk is saying there, well, she's right. Peace is the answer. That's how we achieved peace, here in the world of Star Trek in the 24th century. And Spock says, well, yeah, she was right. Peace is the answer, but at the wrong time. And the reason why I bring this up is to make the point that peace and pacifism is a good thing, but it's the wisdom to know when to be passive. And even when you're in a situation where there is the ability to be passive, you have to understand that nothing is stagnant in the Tao, that the pendulum swings, that a time may come where there's a time for action and battle, in a sense. And so you have to be prepared for that. And so that's why I brought up this episode, for that reason. Okay, so as I said, peace is not the same as pacifism. It's and this gets to sort of the heart of what Derek was talking about, the promotion of peace versus the provocation of peace. And the other thing that I thought of about this is, the Western view of things. That when I had that slide up about the paradox of, if you want peace, you have to prepare for war. And if I was going to explain that in a Western context, I'd be tempted to kind of bring up Teddy Roosevelt, his famous saying of, walk softly but carry a big stick, right? And that really isn't what the Ultimate Warriors were about. That's sort of a very Western interpretation of peace. It's sort of like peace through might, and that's not really what they were driving at. It was the Noble Warriors were actually the opposite of that. They were promoting peace by self-improvement, by a genuine concern and compassion for the general welfare of others. And yes, if the opportunity came where you had to go through violence to get to peace, they'd be willing to do that. But they always hoped not to have to. And, in thinking of all that, I couldn't help really but think about Bill and Ed. Because, of course, one can follow the martial path and still be perfectly in tune with the Tao. And our fellow travelers on the path, Bill and Ed, they're good examples of that. Between the two of them, they probably have like 60 plus years of experience training for fighting. And yet neither one of them are not spoiling for a fight. They're not looking for a fight. They're not trying to provoke a fight. In all their preparation to deal with violence, they're actually promoting self-improvement and peace. And they both do that very skillfully. So their focus is on the cultivation of their true selves and the improvement of their true selves. And with martial arts, you are specifically focusing on the physical preparation as well. But they know, both Bill and Ed know in a very real sense the mechanics of how to go through violence to get to peace, but they both sincerely never want to have to do that. And if you go through presentations that both of them have given on the subject of martial arts, or where the subject of martial arts has come up, they've both said that if they found themselves in a situation where they actually had to employ what they knew, they'd both consider it a failure on their parts in not being able to have recognized that it was coming and be able to deal with it in a way to prevent it escalating to that point. In other words, dealing with it sooner. And I think that spirit that Bill and Ed have is very much the same as the ancient Ultimate Warriors of China. That's what they were trying to do too. That they weren't spoiling for a fight. They didn't want one, but they realized that by preparing for one, they were improving themselves and learning to recognize when can we intervene earlier, what can we do to promote peace so that it never comes to that. And I think that's what really being an Ultimate Warrior is ultimately about. And so we may not think of ourselves as warriors, much less ultimate warriors, right? But as Derek points out in this chapter, the process of living life can be thought of as a type of battle. Often it can be a battle against our own demons. Sometimes that involves working to reduce our own egos. Sometimes the biggest battles I've been in are battles with myself, where I have to get through my own hard-headedness or self-promotion to do what's good and right, what's more Tao-like. And that can be, sometimes the battles against ourselves are the toughest battles of all in life. And sometimes it can be about learning not to be paralyzed by fear, where you're stuck with analysis and you just analyze, and never do anything. And so, not being paralyzed by fear means that, you're willing to take the appropriate action at the appropriate times. And often the wisdom part is knowing what the appropriate action is and when is the appropriate time to apply that living knowledge or ability that you have that you could bring to the table. And so finding the peace within each of us can help us achieve the personal success that makes life worth living. And that ultimately is what being an ultimate warrior is. And of course, hopefully, we continue to have peace in this country where we don't have to fight wars or use violence. But at the same time, sometimes those things are a reality of life, so we have to be prepared for them. But at the same time, even though we're preparing for them, we can strive to be promoters of peace as opposed to provocateurs of it. So I'm going to start to try to sum it up now, if I can. So as Derek points out in this chapter, the ancient Chinese warriors understood that the purpose of martial arts is not to inflict damage, but rather to use as a method for self-improvement, contributing to the general welfare of others, and the promotion of peace. They wished to turn enemies into friends, ultimately. They never sought out reasons to fight. They strove to minimize the possibility of violence. They worked to avoid the vicious cycles of revenge and retribution. And of course, although all that occurred in ancient China, there's certainly plenty of ground here in the present to put that into skill. There's no greater skill in a way than to turn an enemy into a friend. And sadly in this world, when there's conflict that develops between nations, what happens often is, right, the first thing that happens is diplomacy gets cut off. Right? You hear that, right? We're withdrawing diplomatic status from so-and-so country or whatever. It's funny. It's so odd in a sense because, it's fine to have diplomatic relations with another country when everything's honky-dory. But, when there are issues of conflict that come up, it's actually the worst time to remove diplomacy. But that does sort of tend to, notice that tends to be the standard in the world. Diplomacy is removed at the worst possible time. And often, warriors don't have a say in that, right? They're not necessarily in the political sphere. Maybe we should leave the politics to the warriors as well, because the warriors are, in some ways, those most motivated to talk and work it out. Because, as I said, no one knows the horror of war better than a warrior. Okay, so my second summary point here. As we find ourselves embarking on a new year, we have the opportunity to become promoters of peace as opposed to provokers of peace. So we should try our best to remember that peace does not equal pacifism. Cultivating the Tao teachings of unity, balance, and peace can help us turn rivals into friends. It's probably unlikely that anyone in this meeting will engage in warfare, though it's possible. But it's important as we embark on this new year to realize in our lives that the conflicts that we have, though they may not involve spears and guns and missiles and so forth, but they do involve other things. And we can take the lessons from these ancient warriors and even from the modern warriors we may know in the present and take the skills that they have and to promote peace in our own lives, to promote the general welfare of others. And we can do all that by cultivating the Tao teachings every day of our lives, or every day of this year, all of the 365 days of the year that are available to us. Okay, so as always, I want to wrap up the presentation now, and I'll begin with an invitation. If you've learned from the Tao teachings, perhaps you will be open to sharing what you have learned with others by presenting on a topic from the Tao perspective. Sharing the Tao insights you have learned with our Tao community has the potential to deepen your understanding and the understanding of others at the same time. So if that's something that's interesting to you or that you'd like to do, I encourage you to do it, because that's really what community is about. It's about coming together to fellowship and share and learn from each other. And our community, the connection in our community grows stronger when all of us participate. And so as always, I want to end with a book recommendation, The Tao of Joy Every Day, a great book to use daily to help one study and learn the Tao teachings and put them into action. So there it was, The Ultimate Warrior, Day 37, prepare for war, but live in peace. Thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today. I hope I said something that was of use, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday.
Alex, thank you so much for that. This message today is something that I try to apply in real life. It's important to me personally to practice what I talk about. So I look for opportunities to turn enemies into allies. And I want to share a little bit of my experience in that regard. One discovery when you follow the path of the Tao is that you actually don't have that many enemies in the first place, which is a good thing. There are still a few that pop up from time to time. Seems like an inevitable side effect of living a full life. So for those that do pop up, the question is, can I turn them into friends? Well, I found that sometimes it seems pretty much impossible. That's when someone seems out to get you, like an implacable foe. It seems like there's nothing you can do to turn them around, nothing you can do to make peace. Then, yeah, I had to admit that those that can do that, consistently turn enemies into friends, those people are indeed masters and far beyond my meager abilities. But not everything in life is the same. So other times it is surprisingly easy to make peace with other people. It's almost like they're just waiting for me to make a gesture. Maybe a small gesture like, hey, listen, I'm sorry about that. Reach out with an olive branch. Then what I see is that the expression on their face is like a huge relief. Like, yeah, I didn't want to fight either, dude. Let's be friends. You know, it's so great, so delightful when this happens. I'm motivated to do it more and more, at least make an attempt. Now, what I find out when I do it more is that I do get better at it gradually, a little bit at a time. You perfect a skill with practice. Now, I still can't do it consistently, but I do succeed more than before. I can't claim any mastery at this, but perhaps one day I will get there, to the level of the ultimate warrior, as you have explained.
Yeah,
And
and
isn't
Derek, if you
that what
don't
it's all
mind,
about? Sorry, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry, Derek, if you don't mind, I just want to add something. I agree with you so much. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes all that's required is a gesture. But I just wanted to say that for me, what I've noticed is on the many times when I'm not able to turn an enemy into a friend, I've noticed that it really ultimately comes down to me. It's because the very idea of having an enemy hurts me in some way, and I see as a failure, or I feel hurt by whatever that person does. And so the feelings of being hurt, the ego sort of comes into it, and it's bruised and damaged, and it's hard to remember that the ego is a construct and that you can't really be hurt. But ultimately, and I think that's where people who are enlightened really come into play, or who are very skillful at applying these teachings so consistently and are able to turn enemies into friends all the time. I think part of it is because they're just not. It comes down to them. They're not feeling hurt, and when you remove that away, I think it becomes easier. And for me, I know that's what I have to work on. Really, for me, that's the obstacle that makes it the most difficult is perceiving the enemy in a way. And whereas I think people who are very skilled at it, their feelings and emotions and ego don't come into it at all, and so I think it allows them to be better at it. And that's what like you, I'd like to become like them.
Yeah, that's a very strong point. What I notice about masters like these is that they all recognize the nature of their true selves. That is, while I'm over here, all getting my ego bruised, all getting wounded. They over there are recognizing that, well, as who they truly are, they can't really be hurt in any way. They recognize, they understand the teachings of the sixth patriarch about the true self. So, I think that is so important, exactly as what you were saying. So, in fact, I've even, resurrected that particular slide to present it again. In a moment, I'll talk about it in greater detail, but I felt the importance of that slide. to talk about who you truly are, that I looked at it again. I decided to translate it like I do with, Tao Te Ching chapters, make it as exact as I possibly can. So I'll present that in a moment. But yeah, very solid point. So to kind of wrap up what I was saying, I succeed in making friends out of enemies more than before. Still can't really claim any mastery at it, but I'm hopeful one day I'll get there. And that's what it's all about, everybody, to be on the path. The whole idea is that one day I will arrive.